A report on issues facing American democracy was just released by the Chongyang Insitute for Financial Studies of Renmin University. Our Biran has the story.
The report was named 10 Questions for an American Democracy. It raised 10 major concerns, questioning the state of democracy in America. From human rights, system failures to international turmoil. The report provides research-based analysis on the problems in contemporary American governance. According to the survey by the Institute, 57% of people outside the U.S. believe its democracy used to do well, but it has now done so in recent years. A PBS survey published in July 2021 says 81% Americans believe that their democracy is under serious threat.
The 10 questions were raised based on U.S. social disorder at home and turmoil abroad occurring recently. The 10 questions are very profound. It is a diagnosis for American democracy from Chinese experts and scholars.
Many facts shown in the report reflect the potential crisis of U.S. democracy. For example, U.S. COVID infections and death were the highest in the world.
As the coronavirus rages through countries, the U.S. has the audacity to plan a summit for democracy. This is to divide countries instead of unifying them to fight the pandemic. This move has caused doubt and dissatisfaction in many countries.
The report notes that a lot of young people in the countries considered democracies have lost confidence in the political systems. Actually, it's time for us to realize that there is no one-size-fits-all definition of democracy, and it can be adapted and made practical to the circumstances of a country. Biran, CGTN, Beijing.
And earlier, the Chinese Foreign Ministry gave a statement on the think tank report. Our Zheng Yibing told us more.
Spokesperson Zhao Lijian read out the questions one by one during a press conference this afternoon. He said the United States should get down to think carefully about these questions, and these questions are questioning the true nature of the U.S. democracy, according to him. And for example, is the U.S. democracy for the majority of U.S. people or not? Is it to realize power balance or just to cause power abuse? And is it to protect human rights or to harm the human rights? And is it to bring development or prosperity to other countries or just bring them disasters and unrests? The spokesperson emphasized China's understanding towards democracy. Let me read out. The democracy is a common value and common for all human beings. And the United States has no right to use its own standard, has no right to exert its own system over others, and has no right to take the fact that the democracy is to gang with others to stir up the confrontation. So this came after the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs released the report on U.S. democracy on Saturday. And this is a ministry strike back on the U.S. interference in Taiwan on the allegation on human rights in Xinjiang.
For more insights on this, I'm now joined by Liu Zhiqing, senior researcher with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Mr. Liu, your think tank released a report today raising these serious questions on American democracy. Now, in your own words, tell us more about this report and the message it hopes to deliver at this time.
As we know that we have already long time that tried to ask and to question the American democracy. So in the time that past 10 years that these similar questions have always raised us to consider, to think about the real facts, what happened in America. We should say that in America at the moment, there's no real democracy, but it's only have the democracy. Why we say democracy instead of democracy in the United States? We can't see the facts of what happened in the past years. During the pandemic outbreak, during the trade war against China, during the war in the Middle East, all over the world, they made turmoils everywhere. Now try to make turmoils in Asia, in South East Sea. So all these points and the facts that show that the American democracy is a fake one. It's sick. It's really becoming democracy, make the society crazy, make the people, make the life crazy. So in this way, we are very obligated to tell the truth and the real picture of the U.S. democracy to the world, to see what's the meaning of the nature of the U.S. democracy. We have to see that one fact, the real democracy should create freedom, should create friendship, not create hate. But what American democracy made, they made hate among people, they made hate among nations, they made hate among different countries. So this is wrong. This is really a fake democracy. This is not what we need. This is not what we want. So we should tell the truth to the world and also to the Americans that they should consider how to transform, how to reform its democracy to a better system.
Mr. Liu, besides posing these 10 questions, the report also reflects on them. It argues that America is less of a democracy today. I mean, I know you talked about some of that in your previous answer, but what are your views on this?
We have to say that the democracy in the United States is not for the majority, because the majority of the normal people, the working class and the working people there have no real democracy in the United States. They have only democracy because every day they are meeting the violence and the gun violence and the different violence from different the white people there. So they have the hate against the minorities and the ethnic people there. So I hate Asian people, for instance, in recent years. So in this way that the majority of people in the United States, as we know that only 1% of the American population has the 99% of the treasures in the United States. That means only 1% of the rich people, the real richest people that rule the whole nation. This is the big problem and the challenge for the United States, especially for the society. So we can see that at the moment for the United States that they should really take encourageable move to take a reform and opening up. They should learn from China and other developing countries. Only one question he should give us answer. If America is a real democratic country, why it cannot invite China to join, to participate in the conference, to discuss the freedom and to discuss democracy together with other members? Why the United States cannot allow the Chinese media, the journalists, to have a free report in the United States? Why the United States cannot allow the Chinese companies to do business as the American one? So all this shows that the democracy in the United States is not for the majority, only for the small group of rich people there.
All right, Mr. Liu, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Now, for an American perspective, I want to also bring in Joseph Gregory Mahoney in Memphis, a professor at the East China Normal University, where he is also the executive director of the International Center for Advanced Political Studies. Professor, the report touches on some deep-rooted problems within the U.S., including systemic racism and wealth inequality. Can I get your thoughts on that?
Sure. You know, on the one hand, both developing and developed nations have long-standing as well as emergent social problems that need to be addressed and improved. No country has reached the end point of its development or reached the best version of itself in its domestic or international affairs. On the other hand, as current CPC Politburo Standing Committee member Wang Huning wrote in his book, America Against America in 1991, the problem with the U.S. at that time was not that it had less problems than China, but that its problems had become systemic and perhaps impossible to reform in so much as they were part of the system itself. Now keep in mind that Wang noted this 30 years ago, and the crises he describes have indeed perpetuated in the United States, including systemic racism and wealth inequality, but also polarizing and systemic decline itself, and by many accounts have worsened with profound spillover effects on the rest of the world, as U.S. problems have often been exported in its foreign and economic policies. Thus, the fact that the report notes these problems is merely a reflection of the current facts, the trend of which has been observable to Chinese leaders over the last 3 decades at least.
The report also claims that the U.S. has used military intervention overseas nearly 400 times since the late 19th century. In 2020 alone, it's said to have spent almost $800 billion on its army. Many say this contradicts its image as a purveyor of world peace. What is your take?
Well, as I noted previously, the U.S. often exports its problems and sometimes does so intentionally in order to relieve pressure on itself. And it's not just in military affairs. When we see gross negligence in governance in other areas, for example, the failures associated with the U.S. instigated global financial crisis in 2008, for which it then abused the power it had over the U.S. dollar as the supranational currency to soften the blow at home, but effectively spread the crises elsewhere in ways that turned other economies against themselves, that it eroded political systems and ended lives. Now, 2008 is just one of many examples. And whether the U.S. does this intentionally or not, it's still a form of international aggression and abuse. But more directly, we can say that the U.S. likes to promote its version of bourgeois democracy as the gold standard for other countries, which is increasingly silly as we see clear indicators of democratic declines in U.S. politics. But more to the point, its actual practices in global affairs emphasizes unilateralism and hegemony. Now, this is the great irony of the upcoming Democracy Summit, that its fundamental purpose appears to be reasserting hegemony over erstwhile allies and aligning them as a global front against China. This is not only anti-democratic towards those with whom it has differences, it's also undemocratic towards its friends. So if other countries don't follow its lead, as you've noted in the question, then what we've also seen is this demonstrated tendency of throwing off the velvet glove of hegemony to reveal the fist of imperialism inside. And this is where we've seen the wars and the aggression throughout the history of the United States, but especially over the last 30 or 40 years.
Professor Joseph Gregory Mahoney, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for making time for us today. The U.S. Summit for Democracy will be held later this week. More than 30 countries like China and Russia have